I'm Scott Weathers. I'm the chair of Lamoille Dems, and I'm really excited to have you here tonight. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Jim Condos and Chris Winters. We're so excited to have them. And I'll introduce them briefly just to be able to speak about a number of issues in Vermont and nationwide around voting rights and voting access. So Secretary of State Jim Condos has served as Vermont's Secretary of State for the past 10 years. Prior to becoming Secretary of State, he served on the South Burlington City Council for 18 years and as a Vermont State Senator from Chittenden County for 8 years. Secretary Condos was raised in the Burlington area, graduating from South Burlington High School, and has received his bachelor's degree from the University of Vermont. We're also really excited to have Chris Winters join us. Chris Winters has served as the Vermont Secretary of State's office for more than 20 years. He was hired initially as a staff attorney for several professional licensing boards, and Chris has continued his work with the office under 3 Secretaries of State as the Director of the Office of Professional Regulation and now as the Deputy Secretary of State. Jim and Chris are here today to talk about a wide range of issues, and I'm so excited to hear from them. So I'll just open it up to them to kick it off, and then we'll have briefly maybe 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A. So Jim or Chris, please feel free.
Thanks, Scott. So I think the first thing that we can talk about is a little bit about what we did last year. And we started, obviously, I assume you can hear me. Yes, it says it's on. So we started about a year ago, as COVID started to rear its ugly head. We approached the legislature with what we could see as issues coming down the pipe with COVID. Nobody knew how long it was going to take, how long we would be locked down, how long COVID would be contagious. And so we started to talk with the legislature about providing some temporary measures to allow us to adapt to the election laws to what we were seeing. We had 2 basic, or actually I'll say 3 basic premises that we operated under. One was to protect the integrity of our elections, obviously, but also to protect the voting rights for all Vermont citizens, and then to protect the health and safety of not only our voters, but also the town clerks and their poll workers. So those were the premises that we used for every decision that we made. It was pretty well known that after I'm trying to remember now. It seems like it was forever ago, but Act 62 when it passed, or no, actually Act 35 when it passed, was really something that was, I guess I would say, the Republicans in the House had put a provision in that required, even though I am considered the chief elections official for the state of Vermont, it required the governor to agree with anything that I was going to do. So the governor and I went into negotiations for about 2 months as we were leading towards the vote by mail system. However, we had to also face up to the fact that to do the vote by mail, we were going to need the time starting back in April, May time period to get ready for it, because there's so many pieces of it that had to be dealt with, working with the town clerks, working with our software vendor, working with hiring a mail house to be able to mail those ballots out, and the post office. Will Senning, my director of elections, was actually in contact with the Postal Service on a weekly basis from probably April on. He was also constantly in touch with the mail house and with the printers. So we had a lot of different aspects that we had to deal with. The end result was we had a tremendous election in November of 2020. We set a new record for voter turnout. 75% of all the votes cast were either vote by mail or early voting before election day. And, it was just such a tremendous, we ended up, we just saw just recently a stat that says we're number 9 in the nation for voter turnout. We also, since 2016, we've been in the top 3 in the MIT Election Performance Index it's a state ranking. It's considered the gold standard for states. And we've been in the top 3 since 2016. So we're really pleased with that. And we started to look at, okay, what's going to happen come January. And obviously we had conversations with both House and Senate leadership, with the governor, about town meeting day and what we were going to face there, because obviously the surge had continued into January. And we started having those discussions back in mid-December. And then the legislature, I've never seen a bill move as fast as it did. The first days of their meetings were Monday, the 9th or 10th or something like that, and by the end of that week, it had passed the House, passed the Senate, and it was on the governor's desk. And that was critical because town meeting day deadlines actually started the following week. So we had to get systems in place, and town meeting, of course, is so different across the state. Some towns do everything from the floor. Some towns do a hybrid of some floor votes and some ballot votes, and other towns, mainly the larger towns, do Australian ballot for everything. So Chris, I don't know if you want to jump in now at this point. We didn't rehearse here or anything.
Yeah, no,
So Chris,
yeah, but I think it's
why don't
worth.
you jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. A lot of us want to block out what happened in 2020, but now we kind of look back and we realize that 2020 was a pilot program for vote by mail in the state of Vermont. We were forced into it. We really had no choice. As Jim said, we had to plan for the worst. We didn't know what it was going to look like in November. We had the governor saying, well, let's wait and see. We'd love to get back to normal in November. Let's not do vote by mail. And we just knew that we couldn't take that risk, because just what would happen if there was this huge surge in November, and there really was in November and December right after the election. But had there been a surge running up to the election, people would have had to choose between their health and their right to vote. And that was just not acceptable to us. So we went back to the legislature. We had a lot of great partners in the House and Senate Government Operations Committees in some of these voting rights groups. You had folks like VPIRG and Main Street Alliance. The League of Women Voters was huge for us with their educational campaigns, disability rights, AARP. We had a lot of people kind of rallying around this idea of doing a massive vote by mail campaign, and we got it right. And we're really fortunate that we got it right, because that led us to this year looking at a bill to make it permanent. Whereas in a lot of other states, you're seeing bills going in the other direction. So I feel really great about being in the Vermont Secretary of State's office, working for a Secretary of State who wants to increase access to the ballot box and not suppress it, not shrink it. Don't cut down early voting hours. Don't cut down opportunities to vote. Don't remove ballot boxes. Go in the other direction. And we can be really proud of doing that in the state of Vermont and set an example for some other states. So here we are with S15, which has now passed the Senate with this broad coalition of support, including a lot of the town clerks, which is hugely important to us. And a lot of Republicans who were such naysayers in 2020 kind of came around. We have a number of them saying, you know what? It turned out more voters. It didn't just turn out more Democrats. There wasn't all this massive fraud that everyone was afraid was going to happen. It was safe, secure, and it helps more people vote. So now we've got this bill moving forward in the House. It has passed the Senate on a really strong 27-3 vote with broad support, and now it's going to be taken up in House Government Operations soon, within the next week or two, I would think.
Great.
So let me just get into a little bit about what S15 does. It basically creates a platform for us to do vote by mail for all general elections going forward. We know that the benefits are higher voter turnout, increased voter access, ease of processing ballots for the town clerks. We're going to give them up to 30 days ahead of time to be able to start processing those ballots, and they'll have the correct policies in place. It's going to expand drop boxes. And I'm saying this as we go, and just so you know what was in the Georgia voting law that just passed. The Georgia the Georgia governor, who was a former Secretary of State. I served with him when we were on the national board, I'm kind of chuckling, but in a mad way, about some of his comments about this expands voting rights. Well, what it does is it provides less time to request absentee ballots. It mandates very strict new ID requirements, not just for voting in person, but for voting by absentee. It'll be illegal now for election officials to mail out absentee ballot applications to all voters, which has been proven to be helpful as well. It's going to reduce the number of drop boxes. This is kind of interesting. The state of Georgia, and I'm not sure exactly how many people they have. I think it's probably around 7 million people overall, or maybe 5 million voters. But it's going to slash the number of drop boxes from 94 down to just 23 in the most populous counties. Let me just put that in perspective. We have a population of 500,000 or 600,000, 500,000 voters, and we had 175 drop boxes throughout the state. So that's kind of interesting to me that they think that this is helpful. They have mobile voting centers, which those are banned. Drive-up voting is banned. Sunday early voting, which we don't have in Vermont, but we have 45 days overall. So we have a very extended voting period. It won't be required like it has been. They've reduced that. Here's the one that I still haven't figured out how this protects election integrity. It'll be illegal to offer food or water to any voters who are waiting in line to vote. And in Georgia, you have to understand, here in Vermont, we have wait times of maybe 5 minutes. In Georgia, they have wait times in some cases of 5 hours to get in to vote. So it's going to be much harder to vote if you go to the wrong polling place. Although here we have the same problem, but here it's pretty easy for people to understand where they vote, and they're just not going to extend any voting hours should election problems arise. So there's a lot of. I like to say it's not so much the voter suppression, although that's the end result. I like to say what the Georgia voting law and the Texas voting law that's being worked on now, and there's over 250 bills that have been proposed in over 40 states at this point, and it's all about ballot access. It's to reduce the access to the ballot, and to me that is unconscionable. You've probably heard me say, I know Chris has heard me say it many a time, but the true voter fraud in this country, because when you talk about voter fraud, the real voter fraud in this country is denying any eligible American the right to cast a ballot. That's the real voter fraud. And that's what these laws are going to do. There's a bill in Congress right now, HR 1. There's a companion bill in the Senate, S1. Chris and I and Will Senning are in constant communication. I've been on Zoom calls with Senator Roy Blunt, Republican from Missouri, Amy Klobuchar, Senator from Minnesota, with Merkley, Senator Merkley from Oregon, and with Senator Leahy's staff as well, talking about how these bills would impact Vermont. And I want to say that both HR1 and S1 really, we probably have 90% of what, we already do 90% of what's in that bill. So we're not as concerned about it as some states appear to be, but the states in the South especially, and the Republican states are really pushing back on this, saying this is a takeover of the election, a federal takeover of elections, which is really not the case. It's providing some basic baselines for voting access for people. Chris, do you want to add anything at that point?
I guess I would just add, Jim, that, you know, in all of these discussions that we have about access to the ballot box, you have to balance it with security. And we should be sure when we talk about ballot access to also talk about the security that we have in place for elections. There's a question in the chat about how you make sure someone only votes once. We were really focused on cybersecurity coming into the 2016 election. And did a lot to beef up our cyber defenses, kind of worried about hacking and things like that had happened. Actual, you know, not actual hacking of any, I think maybe 1 or 2 state systems, but a real attempt to get into our state systems, and all 50 states, our voter registration systems. And so we were really focused on that for the years running up to 2016 and immediately after. We didn't think we would have to deal with the massive kind of misinformation and disinformation that we were getting from within our own borders about voter fraud, about widespread voter fraud. And so we do actually do a lot to take care of making sure that voters only vote once. Jim talks about this all the time. It's hard enough to get people to vote once, never mind get them to vote twice. We have ballots that are matched to particular voters. When we did a mass mailing like this, as you can imagine, we have to pay more attention to our voter checklist and make sure our voter checklists are accurate. Those are getting more and more accurate every day with automatic voter registration, something that's in HR 1 that every state should be looking at as a secure, inexpensive, efficient way to register voters when they get their driver's license. They automatically get registered. That's an automatic feed from the DMV that updates our registration, our voter checklist every single night. So if you change your address with the DMV, it's going to get changed for your voter checklist as well. So there are a lot of ways that we're making sure the checklist has integrity. And then the town clerks are our front line of defense for when those ballots are returned, so that every single ballot gets checked off once. And if someone tries to vote more than once, they vote by mail and then they try to show up in the polling place, they're going to get caught. And we did have a handful of reports of voter fraud this last election when we hadn't had any in a really long time. We sent those to the Attorney General's office for investigation, and out of, I think it was 7, Jim, there was 1 that was found to be actionable. And this was a guy who was trying to prove a point. He bet a family member that he could vote twice. He voted his absentee ballot, and then he went down to the polling place on election day and tried to vote again. Went all the way up to the tabulator, about to put his ballot into the machine, and then decided, no, I'm not going to vote. So that got reported. He was testing the system. The system worked, and he was caught. So I think it's all these bills that are being proposed across the country under the guise of we really have to worry about fraud are not supported by the evidence. We don't see massive voter fraud in these other states. We don't say that it never happens. It does happen, but we don't see it on the massive scale that we've heard repeated over and over and over again. And now we have legislatures coming forward and saying, well, the voters are worried about voter fraud. They think it exists. So we have to do something to ensure integrity. And that's just a totally backwards way of looking at access versus security.
And I also want to just, I was looking at in the chat. So if someone was handing out water bottles that said vote for so-and-so, that would already be illegal, because you're not supposed to hand out stuff, marketing materials, if you want to call it political materials, as you're going into a polling place. So in any case, there was also a question about write-in votes, and thank you for this one, Nick. I know you've spoken to us about this before. This was something that was in conjunction with the town clerks, and I think Linda Martin is on as a former town clerk. But the issue of write-in votes, and I understand your question, except it very rarely happens the way you posed it here, where you have 1,000 overall votes, but that, to a named candidate, and then you might have almost 1,000 write-ins. That just rarely happens. And I think if something like that were to happen, the clerks would be wary of that. But I also think, and this wasn't necessarily just our decision, this was in conjunction with the town clerks. The town clerks, this is something they've been wanting for quite some time. It's on election night, and when they're verifying their votes and certifying the votes over the next 48 hours after election day, the numbers of people who write in one or two votes here and there, it really is time consuming for the town clerks, and really has no basis for a general election. We did have a statewide recount a few years ago, because we did have a write-in candidate for the Progressive Party for governor, and we did have to have that recount. And on the recount, we found that that person was within the range of differential between the votes, the 2 to 5%. So the system worked, and I think everything we did in the past year, we had a group of about 12 clerks, large towns, small towns, rural towns versus urban towns. And we would meet with them and bounce ideas off of them before we went forward. So I think, this is not something that we did in a vacuum. It was something that we worked with the town clerks on. I think I'll stop there, and we can take some questions, Scott, if anybody wants.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. I know we're close to time. If Jim and Chris, if y'all are able to go maybe 5 or 10 minutes over, we'd love it, but no pressure. Thank you. Well, I'd love to kind of steer us in a little bit of a new direction. I'm very excited to hear about the universal vote by mail legislation. I would love to hear from each of y'all, if you're comfortable sharing kind of what beyond this kind of universal vote by mail, if there are any other kind of reforms that you think would best ensure voting access, voting rights, voting security, any aspect of our voting system that you think could be improved. I would love to hear just like, a pie in the sky vision of what kind of the ideal voting system might look like, if you feel comfortable. So would love to hear.
So I think the first thing I would say is after the 2016 or leading up to the 2016 election, most of the secretaries of state across the country really weren't paying too much attention to cybersecurity, and boy, did we get hit with it in 2016. But I think we were fortunate here in Vermont in that we had taken steps dating back as far as 2012 and 13 to beef up our cybersecurity. We have things like, for instance, our voter checklist, the statewide voter checklist is backed up every night. So if someone were to break in, hack into the voter checklist and make a mess of it, we'd be able to reset it within 24 hours. That was a critical piece for us, but we also have firewalls, and we have a column of vendor that actually monitors our system 24/7 for intrusions. We're connected through the Department of Homeland Security to what's called an Albert monitor, which monitors all the traffic coming into the Secretary of State's office via the internet. And they can tell us within 10 or 15 minutes if we're being attacked. So we have all these different things in place. And I think cybersecurity, and now the new one, I think, and I'll let Chris talk about misinformation, disinformation, but cybersecurity is probably the number one issue that we're really paying a lot more attention to than we ever did. Chris, do you want to talk about misinformation, disinformation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. I think that's one of the things that's really in the forefront now more than ever. After 2016, we were starting to worry about it a little bit. We were hearing stuff come out about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and how people were being influenced online to vote certain ways, micro-targeting of voters, how that misinformation can spread so quickly. I think in the coming years, you're going to see things like deep fake videos where you can't tell the real person from a computer generated video that's saying something that could totally influence your elections in your state. So we're seeing more and more of that coming out. So you would like to think that the Secretary of State's office doesn't have to focus on something like this, but I think we might need to be getting back into the realm of things like civics and civil discourse in our politics and media literacy, like being able to discern what's real on the internet and what's not. And that's a huge task. That's not just for the Secretary of State's office, but it's something that I think we all ought to really be concerned about, that folks know how elections work, know a little bit more about civics than they do, and become good citizens and good digital citizens in their behavior out there that's in public on social media. So that's an area that we could turn to. The misinformation thing is just huge, with other countries standing up full giant programs just aimed at influencing American politics and American elections. You'll never stop it, but I think the media literacy and the being able to discern the truth on the internet is something that we all ought to be thinking about.
So, and Scott, just to kind of go back a little bit on the positive side, we're already starting to look at updates to our election management system, which was installed in 2015. We shot from 16th in the nation to #1 in the nation after the 2016 election. We dropped a little bit. We're at #3 after the 2018 election, and the 2020 election those results won't be up until sometime next year in the summer. So we won't know for sure, but our goal is not to stand pat. We want to continue to improve how our systems work. And some of it, someone asked in their thing, how do you prevent someone from voting twice? Well, our system, and I think Linda could speak to this as well, if a town clerk goes to same-day register someone and they're already in the system, it's going to be known. The system will tell them that they're already in the system if they're within Vermont. We also are joining a program called ERIC, which is owned by the states. There's about 30 states that are involved in it right now. And we'll be able to anonymize our voter checklist, send it to them. They'll bounce it off the other 30 states, send it back to us and tell us, we found these people have died. These people have moved to another state, that kind of stuff. They'll also be able to tell us if someone had voted twice. And so this is all part of cleaning up the checklist. And our clerks are some of the hardest working municipal officials we have in Vermont. And on election night or election day, they're working from 5 in the morning till after midnight in some cases. And it's really, really important that that we have that the town clerks are involved in this process as much as we can be. They are the ones, they and the boards of civil authority of each community are responsible for the maintenance, meaning the additions and deletions from the voter checklist within that town. It then folds up into our statewide voter checklist. So if someone tries to register in Vermont, it'll tell them this person's registered now in Rutland and they already voted or whatever. So there are ways to do this, and we're looking to how we can improve that even further. I think there was a question also about someone out of state receiving ballots. That probably didn't happen in November. What they may be referring to is what happened in the primary when we sent a postcard out asking people, and that postcard was actually forwarded to wherever the location was that person left for an address. And the whole idea was to help clean up the checklist. As far as November election, we didn't forward any ballots. It went right to the address, and if it didn't, it went back to the town clerk. So and I think I see another question about what outreach to diverse communities, where Vermont does not cross any threshold for other languages other than English. But we, actually 4 years ago, we started the process, or 2 years ago, we started the process to look at that. We worked with the New American communities. We came up with 6 languages. They came up with 6 languages. We translated ballots. We have translated videos on our website so that we're testing it in both Burlington and Winooski, which had the highest number of New Americans, and we're hoping to roll that out for the 22 election even further. So we are reaching out to other people, and we'll see what happens.
Thanks. I think we might have time for one more question if anyone else has one that they'd like to ask. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Oh, Dave.
I see Dave's raising his hand.
Well, I couldn't get to my remote hand. I apologize. There was a radio talk show last week where somebody from Middlebury said, I'm paraphrasing, they saw people scoop up a lot of ballots that have been discarded and vote with them. Can you comment on that? Is that worrisome?
Yeah. So that I was the one that was on the radio station, and it was a caller that called in and said he owns an apartment house in Middlebury, and there were, like, as he described it, there were 25 ballots just sitting around the mailboxes, and college students scooped them up, voted them, and sent them back. I guess he must have been there when this happened, and I said to him that offline, if you don't mind, please contact my office. Let us know the particulars, what the address was, and any information that we can pass along to the Attorney General's office. A lot of these, I doubt that he actually saw anybody actually vote those ballots. And it could be that someone just picked them up and just discarded them. But I think, it's innuendo and alleged things I like to call it misinformation, and we have yet to hear from this gentleman. He has not contacted us. I said to him, I didn't need his name. I just need to have the name of what the address was, because as Chris had described, every envelope that we mailed out had the voter ID on the inside envelope. So when that thing comes back to us, we know where that envelope went, to what address it went to, and then we can follow up and see if it's someone else, because you have to sign the ballot, and in order, it's a pretty significant fine and prison sentence, and I just, it's highly doubtful that people are going to vote for one ballot to make one ballot work for them, and it just doesn't happen. I mean, we haven't seen it in Vermont.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim and Chris. We really appreciate your time. We are going to head into our legislative updates portion of our meeting. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to leave. No worries at all.
I'm leaving.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jim. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. Well, so let's take it maybe alphabetically. I think that Dan, that would put you first if I know my ABCs, if you want to go.
Great. Hey, thanks. Human Services Committee, the committee I serve on, we passed the bill out last week on Friday, the Office of the Child Advocate. It's something I've been working on for quite a while. Looking forward to seeing that. It's going to end up in appropriations, and it may end up in either government ops or judiciary because of access to records, especially records pertaining to youth in foster care, and making sure that the advocate has the information that they need in order to make really good decisions on how the state can make sure that youth in state custody have the best chance of transitioning to adulthood successfully. So what we're trying to do is come up with an office where one of the only New England state. I think we're the only New England state that does not have an Office of the Child Advocate. We want to make sure this person will be able to provide feedback to the legislature on best practices to make sure DCF is, making sure that they're providing the right services to these children. And especially now that we've closed Woodside and a lot of youth are going out of state or into, private treatment programs, we want to make sure that they're being adequately cared for. So I was glad to see that move out of our committee on Friday, and then looking forward to seeing it getting all the way to the Senate and hopefully to the governor. So the other bill that Representative Wood from Waterbury and I worked on was the looking at the reimbursement rates for home and community-based providers. You're probably all sick of listening to me talk about this, but I was glad to see that move out of committee. And Representative Iacovone was our champion in the Appropriations Committee. So that is now moving on to the Senate. So we're hoping that, it progresses forward. So yeah, that's what I've been up to this week. Moving forward in this week, we're looking at decriminalization of buprenorphine. So this is a harm reduction, looking at, how do we make sure that people who are in recovery or want to be in recovery have access to buprenorphine. So we'll be interested to see how that bill plays out. We just took a walkthrough and some really early testimony on it in committee on Friday. So we'll be hearing more about that this week. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, glad to answer them.
I would just be curious, Dan, what are the odds of the Bupe legislation getting out this year as opposed to taking testimony and then moving it next year?
I think we'll probably see it pass. I mean, I'm not sure if the Senate's going to be able to take it up this session. It's not on the crossover, but I think we are taking a serious look at it. We passed it out of committee last year before COVID hit, and it kind of petered out. So it'll be good to at least see it move forward. Be ready for next session if that's where it goes, or if the Senate decides to take it up, put it on to something else and send it back. Who knows?
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Dan? All right. Well, Dave, I think if you'd like to go next, feel free.
It's a little alphabet. It's easy to cover. I'll try to be brief, but before I start, I wanted to share the sad news that Avram's wife passed away Saturday morning, Amy Darley, and I spoke with Avram this morning, and it's always difficult when those things happen, planned or unplanned. So we're gonna, if people would like to send him a card or anything, what I may do is send Scott his mailing address, and then maybe you can handle it from there. As far as legislative matters, I wanted to underscore three large investments that we're recommending to the Senate. $150 million to advance broadband. That's really significant for internet access around the state. We're quadrupling the amount of money from 10 million to 50 million for affordable housing. That's a big deal, though much more is needed. And we're recommending all of the money that the Vermont State Colleges asked for, and perhaps a little more. And that's huge. In my opinion, I think we'll need to do something next year, not as significant as $50 million, but another major commitment in order to make things work the way they should. Those are three large areas that are real significant. We wouldn't have been able to do these without the federal money from the Federal Recovery Act from President Biden. But they still are not easy to do. And a little bit more on higher education, something that hasn't gotten a lot of notice, but I think is very meaningful. If you are a Vermont family, Vermont household, earning less than $50,000 a year, you will be able to go to community college at no tuition cost. You'll file your federal and get your federal assistance grants, and then the state will make up the difference. I think you'll have to pay for your books, and but that's can be real meaningful to get people in there who may then want to fully matriculate and move on for a higher degree or some other source. So I'm watching. I think we have enough money to float that for 3 years, and maybe it will get traction, and we'll see where it goes. Quickly on one other bill that I think is coming up this week that you may hear about. There's a bill that would require contractors to become certified. And I think the fee is $75 if you're a sole contractor, $250 if you're an employer with multiple contractors. I was against the bill. I voted against it 2 years ago. I just had spoken to contractors, and I just thought I was of this opinion, wrongly, I think, but then enough is enough, and let's leave people alone. And the fear is that people were being scammed, and there was no system to put some modest quality checks on there, so you could see if somebody was on a registry, etc. When I heard the testimony that said from 2017 to 2020, over 500 Vermonters had filed complaints with the Attorney General on poor construction ripoffs, if you will, totaling over $3.1 million, changed my mind. I said, this is to me bigger than a breadbasket. And if this will in some way help, might be a nuisance to the contractor. They won't go out of business for $75, I don't think. And it's right now for any project over $3,500, which in this day and age, you can't do a deck for that. But in any event, it's a start. So that'll be coming up. And I think Proposition 5 will be coming up in the Senate to move forward a public vote on at a general election on abortion laws. So that'll rekindle some interest. I'll stop there, see if there's any questions or comments.
I would be curious. I know that Proposition 5 deals with reproductive liberty. I'm just curious if you've received any opposition to that. I know that some of the anti-choice folks have been particularly active, and so would love to hear.
Oh, I'll let Dan jump in, but absolutely. You know, that I've heard when it was being voted 2 years ago, it was very intense, and I expect it to happen again. But what I've said to people, what's more fair than letting the people decide a controversial issue at this point and let democracy work? But that still doesn't work. A lot of misinformation on that, but I'll ask Dan if he.
Yeah, so that will come to our committee. If the Senate does vote it out, I'm not sure what their schedule is. It's and then I believe we will be holding a public hearing on it. I'm not sure exactly how that will work with Zoom, but be interesting to hear the testimony on it. And yeah, we can vote it up or down. We can't make any changes to it, and then it goes to the voters in 2023 is, I think, the plan.
And just briefly, if I may, Scott, there was a question in the chat box. How would $50 million for housing be sustained on an ongoing basis? There may be enough federal money to do something for a couple of years, but after that, it would likely fall to the $10 or $20 million level from the Vermont property transfer tax. So that's how, not an insignificant amount, but that's how we would sustain it going forward. And
I'll just add quickly, we actually had housing in the Older Vermonters Caucus. We meet every week, as most people know. And I invited folks to come in and have a really good discussion around housing for older Vermonters and the lack thereof, especially in our rural communities, and access to that. Because as we know, having senior housing, especially on our fixed route transportation where we can run buses or in community centers is lacking, especially you know, in rural communities. So we had a good discussion on that a couple weeks ago. So, and this week is adult days. They're just starting to reopen, and we're gonna hear what their opening plans are for the adult days.
And we've recommended $5 million for the adult days going forward to help them with their startup costs. It's not unlike childcare. You have to bring the staff in, and with many vulnerable Vermonters afraid of, you know, coming out, socializing with COVID and coming out to a group day setting, it will take a while to build up their census. So those dollars, I think, will be very important going forward for them. We lost 3 adult day centers closed last year. That may not sound like many. I think there were 12 to begin with. And they play a real important part of the safety net system care for elder and disabled Vermonters.
Yeah, and that money is going to be really good to help them get up and going, because they can only bill for hours when an individual is taking part in their services. So, you know, what happens is, you know, you get a snowstorm or people are afraid to go to to these adult days. Then they have to figure out how to make ends meet, especially when they can't bill out those hours. So looking forward to hearing what's going to be going on with that this Wednesday at noon.
I got a question. David, that millions of dollars for that for new construction or for existing buildings?
I think it's anything. If it's over $3,500 to patch your roof, but it's an existing roof.
No, for the housing, low income housing.
You broke up. I think it's a combination of some rehabs, some new construction.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Any other questions?
You all look so serious. But thank you for coming out tonight.
Yeah. All right. Well, this concludes the broadcasted part of our monthly meeting. So thank you, everyone, for attending. We're really grateful to Jim and Chris for coming to Lamoille Dems. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Feel free to, or next month. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about our monthly meetings, and we'll proceed now into the business portion of our meeting.